Hello and welcome back to On the Grid Podcast, Season 4, Episode 39. And this will be the final race review of the season. So it's the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Joining with me, as ever, is Adrian Keita. How are you today?
Today on the 12th of December 2024, I'm very good. But a couple of days prior, whilst the race was happening on the Sunday, I was very much in a more somber mood. Uh, as we'll get on to the episode and learn what actually happened at the end of the season. Um, then the viewers and the listeners and what you not will know why I was in a bit of a somber mood. But today I feel good. I'm a little bit bored now. I think F1 needs to return already. But yeah, let's just get on with it and let's start off with uh all the things, all the doings in Abu Dhabi.
Absolutely. So we'll kick things off with qualifying. And in Q1, the big news was that Lewis Hamilton was knocked out. I think what caught me was the amount of traffic towards the end of the session. Starting that lap, it felt like he was in a bit of a dodgy situation anyway, because he had a car right in front of him. But his lap was going to be good enough to get him out into Q2 until a certain Kevin Magnussen knocked a bollard straight into his path, and that really, really cost him. What are your thoughts on Hamilton's Q1 exit?
Well, if I'm being completely concretely honest, I worked throughout the whole of the weekend, so I didn't catch much of it. But I did see the replay of Kevin Magnussen moving out of the way and knocking that little bollard on the exit of one of the turns where Latifi crashed into the barrier. If you remember that incident quite well, because I know you do. But yeah, he knocked that bollard straight into the path of Lewis Hamilton, and did it actually go under Lewis's car? Um,
It got caught in the floor, so it's
oh,
clearly having an impact.
yeah. Well, there you go. With that being said, obviously, the traffic in Abu Dhabi, especially heading into the final sector, shall we say, is disgusting. The amount of traffic, especially when there's 20 cars out there on track, the amount of traffic you're going to get is absolutely horrendous. You could say that we could compare the Abu Dhabi final sector in a Q1 session to London traffic in traffic out in rush hour because at times you're not getting through, but it happens on every single circuit. I feel, and the FIA are trying to obviously make improvements so that it doesn't happen and that there's more of a gap between the cars when they actually do come out on track. But I don't think the FIA can monitor that at all. It's unlucky for Lewis Hamilton for what happened to him, but I don't know what on earth Kevin Magnussen's doing, trying to avoid Lewis Hamilton by going to the left and not veering more to the right towards obviously the barrier and letting Lewis Hamilton start his lap that way. It's all a big kerfuffle, and unfortunately, it cost Lewis Hamilton a spot in Q2.
Yeah, absolutely did. Also out in Q1 was Jack Doohan in his first Formula One race, qualified in 20th. And I don't think there was any pressure on him this weekend. I think it was basically treated as a testing session, really. Frankie Colapinto qualified in 19th, and obviously Hamilton in 18th, Guan Yu Zhou in 17th, and Alex Albon in 16th. Moving on to Q2, and I think one of the actually, going back to Q1, something that did catch attention was Perez's lap. So his first lap was deleted for track limits at turn one, and then got reinstated, which I find absolutely bizarre, considering they're done on a sensor, the track limits. So they're not manually done, manually reviewed. It's done on a sensor, which would have said he was off the track. And then they've reinstated it. And then moving on to Q2, when you got Charles Leclerc, who had his lap time deleted, you put them side by side, I don't think you can find a difference. Genuinely. It is one of the hardest spot the difference games you could play, other than the fact one car's red, one car's blue. So obviously that impacted Ferrari's chances a great deal. What were your thoughts on that incident?
Yeah, that's another incident that I saw posted throughout social media after the qualifying session how Sergio Perez's lap in Q1 was reinstated for track limits in quotation marks. And then Charles Leclerc does pretty much exactly the same, and his lap time gets deleted in Q2, which sees him qualify 14th. I mean, realistically, for Ferrari, I don't think it would have mattered too much because Charles was set to take a grid penalty regardless. But saying that, if he qualifies first, there's a 10th place grid drop. He starts 11th. So it's a massive difference. He did in fact start the race from the back row of the grid in 19th. But if his lap time was not deleted and he qualifies on pole, it's at worst 11th. It's bizarre. I think the race directors and the stewards and whatnot really need to concretely look at themselves and think of the rules and set the rules concretely. Don't change them midway through the sessions. Don't do this, that, and the other. It's got to be flowing throughout and it's got to be consistent. Because from like we said, we saw what happened with Perez, we saw what happened with Leclerc, pretty much the same incident. One lap time stayed, one lap time got deleted. That's all you need to know. Yeah, consistency. I think as F1 fans, that's all we ask for, consistency. And clearly in between Q1 and Q2, I think the stewards and the race director had a few too many energy drinks and got a little bit trigger happy.
Yeah, absolutely. The good thing is now that they've got that new race director in place, they've got plenty of time in the off season to actually hash out what they're going to be doing with these new regulations in terms of track limits, in terms of penalties, all of that and the other. Because they've been a bit all over the place the last couple of races. So also out in Q2, we had Kevin Magnussen qualified in 15th, Leclerc, as we said, in 14th. Stroll, Lawson, and Sonoda from 13th up to 11th. And then moving on to Q3. Now, Nico Hulkenberg was the first person to set their final Q3 lap time. And watching it live, I did hope for a few seconds because he provisionally put it on pole position, Nico Hulkenberg, with a storming lap. Ended up in Q4, but what a lap that was from Hulkenberg.
He didn't end up in Q4. He ended up in P4, not Q4. I know what you meant. It's okay.
It was
All
actually
right.
the secret session after Q3.
Who is it? Oh, well, clearly I didn't see it because I was too busy working. So yeah, how he ended up in a secret session, I will never know. Um, but with that being said, yes, he did qualify P4, but obviously he had that three place grid drop, which dropped him down to P7. So I mean, every fan was hoping that Nico Hulkenberg could produce something out of the ordinary to get that podium finally, because when you look on the face of it, what he's doing at the moment, going to kick Sauber for a season, waiting until Audi hit, and just kind of develop the heck out of that car in 2026. He's got pretty much a year on the sideline if you look at it on the face of things. But we've obviously seen good things from the last two races. We obviously saw Joe Points, Valtteri Bottas made his way into Q3 in this weekend as well. So there's plenty of positives for Sauber in that sense, where they've got a lot more wind tunnel time than rest of the other teams. But for Nico Hulkenberg, it's just unfortunate. He obviously got penalised for what he did. Qualified in P4 ahead of Max Verstappen, ahead of George Russell, Fernando Alonso even. I mean, you say Sergio Perez, but Sergio Perez got out qualified by Valtteri Bottas and Fernando Alonso and everybody else. So you can't really put him in that same category. But Nico Hulkenberg on pace alone was quicker than a Red Bull and a Mercedes. Think about that and put it into perspective, because he could be something special in 2026 if Audi bring the correct package. Oh dear Lord, he could be dangerous, and we could finally see a podium, hopefully.
Well, technically, it was quicker than both on sheer pace, quicker than both Mercedes, quicker than both Red Bulls, quicker than a Ferrari. Um, a brilliant effort from Nico Hulkenberg. Carlos Sainz as well put it into to P3, made a slight error towards the end of his lap. I think out of the last corner, he had got a little snap of oversteer, which absolutely cost him a chance of getting a front row, maybe even cost him a chance of pole position, with Lando Norris securing a front row start for both McLarens, Oscar Piastri in second, and like I said, Carlos Sainz qualified in third. And I think at that point, with Leclerc starting right at the back, I think yourself as a Ferrari fan would admit that it was pretty much game over from the get-go, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was just hoping for the worst, really. I was just hoping that both McLarens would crash into the barrier, Verstappen would take someone out, and he did, and he did. But I was hoping that he'd take both of them out and just there'd be a monumental first corner crash in Abu Dhabi. But he took one casualty, but couldn't take both. But yeah, like I said at the start of the episode, the mood in the Keita household, or should I say the Adrian Keita room, was quite somber and yeah, filled with sadness.
And the rest of the top 10, Max Verstappen qualified in fifth, Pierre Gasly sixth, Russell seventh, Alonso eighth, Valtteri Bottas, like we said, put it in P9, and Sergio Perez, I think he had his only lap time in Q3 deleted, so finished in 10th. And let's get on to our 1 to 10 driver ratings. First of all, Lando Norris qualified on pole and finished first. I'm going to go for 10 out of 10. Straightforward, faultless from start to finish. Sainz put him under a lot of pressure after the pit stops, but he managed it brilliantly, and he's the reason that McLaren secured the constructors.
Can we point out that Lando Norris started from pole, led every lap, and finished first for what feels the first time in forever? He's not bottled a pole position.
Second time, I think. I think he done it in Singapore.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying first time in forever. Like it feels like an eternity since we've said Lando Norris has converted pole position into a victory. Um, I'm agreeing with you. I'm giving him also a 10 out of 10. Like I mentioned, he qualified first, finished first, led every lap, weathered the storm that Sainz kind of put him under. Yeah, there's not much more you can add about a faultless drive. It feels like we've finally given a good grade for Lando Norris because he's had a run of form which has been unlike what his car's been giving him. Because McLaren, like we kept on saying throughout this whole season, they've had the quickest car for what feels 3 quarters of this season. And there should not have been any championship battle between the constructors and the drivers. They should have had it all wrapped up, sealed, and delivered. But obviously, Lando Norris has had a few slip ups here and there, but in Abu Dhabi, it was faultless. So 10 out of 10.
Yeah, so the last 5 races for Norris, he got an 8.5 in Mexico when he finished second, 5 in Brazil, 6 in Vegas, 7.5 in Qatar, and then a 10 out of 10 here. And then moving on next, Carlos Sainz qualified in third and finished second. I've gone for a 9 out of 10. It would have been a 10 if he had got the victory. Unfortunately, he couldn't. But a very, very good drive for his final race at Ferrari. I think he was a bit disappointed that he couldn't help secure the constructors. But still a near perfect from Sainz. He just lacked a little bit of pace, but I think McLaren had the slightly better car this weekend.
You know what? Call me trigger happy, but you're going to see a lot of 10 out of 10s from me. And with Carlos Sainz on his final race at Ferrari, I've gone with a 10. Like you said, he could not have done much more because I think with Norris and with McLaren, they had the superior package in Abu Dhabi. He was obviously fortunate of what happened to Oscar Piastri when him and Max Verstappen collided. So he took that second place on like it was his own, and from that point onwards, he held it. Obviously, Leclerc and Hamilton came through the pack, but they weren't troubling Carlos Sainz or Lando Norris. So, yeah, it's for me. I think it's a goodbye 10 out of 10 from me personally, being a Ferrari fan and being so strongly affiliated with Carlos Sainz because Carlos Sainz has been a great servant for Ferrari. He's had a few victories, quite a few podiums, and he's given me a lot of happy memories. But obviously, he wasn't able to get that victory, which is unfortunate. We couldn't secure the Constructors' Championship, but hey, Carlos Sainz is now jumping ship to Williams. And he's proven that his form has continued in the off-season test in Abu Dhabi. So I'll be happy for Carlos Sainz always and forever when he drives for Williams, but at Ferrari in his final race, he could not have done much more. So I've given him a 10. And like I've mentioned, I've given quite a few 10 out of 10s here because it's a final race weekend, and I feel a little bit sad and a little bit emotional about all of this fiasco. So yeah, I've given Carlos Sainz similarly to Lando Norris a 10 out of 10.
Up next is Charles Leclerc. Obviously, started down in 19th and finished third. It's a 10 out of 10. What else can you say? He was fantastic this weekend. I think if he's starting at the front, then Ferrari have got a brilliant chance to get the constructors, and to get the victory with one of the two drivers, and then maybe third place with the other. But so close, but yet so far for Charles Leclerc. Finished third, finished 30 seconds off the pace, but I don't think that's what matters. He secured a brilliant podium down from 19th, made up, what was it, 11 places on the opening lap. No, there was a bit of carnage going on as well, but he was fantastic. So yeah, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, this is the first non-10 out of 10 that I'm going to give them now, Jake. Yeah, 10 out of 10 for Charles Leclerc. Um, it's just a shame that he was knocked out in Q2 and couldn't make it through to Q3 because that, like I said, that 10 place grid penalty. Worst he starts his probably what if we're saying he's fourth or third, because I think the two McLaren should with superior pace. If he's third or fourth, worst he starts his 13th, 14th. And like we said, he made up 11 places on that opening lap. That technically puts you in the podium places, good sir. But like I mentioned, it's a lot of if buts and maybes and not absolutes. And what was absolute, he finished on the podium, making up 16 places from where he started at the start of the race in 19th. So if we're given a certain Max Verstappen a 10 out of 10 for what he did in Brazil from 17th to victory, making up 16 places to get on the podium is surely worthy of a 10 out of 10 as well.
Lewis Hamilton up next. I think he started down as 16th after qualifying 18th and finished fourth. So, call me biased. I'm happy to be called biased on this one. I've gone for a 10 out of 10. Brilliant drive from him. What an overtake on the final lap as well, round the outside of George Russell. I know he had obviously much fresher tyres, but that's not usually an overtake you would see happen round the outside at turn 9 like that. So brilliant stuff from him, and it would have been nice to get the podium, but what a way to finish off his time at Mercedes with that sort of overtake on Russell and bring on 2025 where there's a championship battle incoming in that Ferrari.
Hey, I want not have called you biased because I also went for a 10 out of 10 for Lewis Hamilton. Starting all the way back down in 16th to get up to fourth place is tremendous. And like you mentioned, that move on George Russell on the last lap was scintillating, was kind of a bit of old Hamilton in a sense, mixed in with a bit of Ayrton Senna. If there's not a gap if there's a gap and you don't go for it, you're not a racing driver. And Lewis Hamilton is certainly is certainly a racing driver because he's proven it. With that being said, it has been reports have stated that Lewis Hamilton did sort of inherit most of George Russell's parts, his upgrades, that is, his upgrade package, for this last race in Abu Dhabi. I know you're pulling a face, but it has been said in the news that that George Russell did give Lewis Hamilton basically most of his upgrades for Abu Dhabi. And it's a nice thing for George Russell, but he paid the price for it and he finished fifth instead of fourth. So, joke's on you, George. because Lewis did it in technically your car, and you finished behind him. So, L. But 10 out of 10 for Lewis Hamilton.
I'm not sure how true that is, but I do know that Russell was running a sort of a newly designed suspension or experimental design suspension in order so that they could run it in the postseason testing to basically help them for next year. That's the only sort of change of parts that I'm aware of for George Russell, who, speaking of which, he qualified in seventh and finished eighth. I've gone for an 8 out of 10. Very solid. Was very strong this weekend, but I think he missed out in Q3 when he really should have been getting onto the front couple of rows. And then a solid race, but didn't really threaten. Got frustrated by Gasly for a long part of that race. And then I think he pit very, very late. I think he was the second or third last to pit, which worked out brilliantly for him. But he wasn't able to keep up with Leclerc, which would have bumped it up to a 9, I think.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you on this one as well. I've given George Russell an 8 out of 10. Um, Obviously, it's quite hard looking at George Russell because he's also one of them drivers who's had very much an up and down last couple of races in his Formula One season this term. And this race just wasn't the one for George Russell. He was, like you mentioned, frustrated by Pierre Gasly, and then to be, I wouldn't say humiliated, but outclassed by his more experienced teammate on the last lap, who gained fourth place, and George dropped down to fifth. Um, yeah, like you said, if he was able to kind of keep tabs on Charles Leclerc and kept the threat away from Lewis Hamilton, catching him on the last lap, it would have been a 9. But he finished fifth, and for me, it was an okay race. His qualifying performance wasn't ideal, wasn't great, but here we are talking about a George Russell mediocre performance, but he still had a good race. Just wasn't up to the high standards of the top three or certainly the top four in this race. So yeah, I've also said sort of an 8 out of 10.
Next up is Max Verstappen, qualified in fifth and finished sixth. I've gone for a 5 out of 10. I don't know if the pace was there in the Red Bull, but obviously we got to speak about that incident at the start. I feel like this might be a bit controversial. I think he's got a right to try and make a move at that corner. He's obviously completely misjudged it, and Piastri's gone. He's gone into the side of Piastri, but Piastri's left the door wide open. It's not as if he's coming from a million miles back, and I think Piastri could give him slightly more room. It's definitely a penalty for Verstappen, but I think that Piastri could have done more to avoid it, is what I'm trying to say. Rather than it shouldn't have been a penalty for Verstappen. I think Piastri could have helped himself out a little bit more by not keeping the door so open and by giving a little bit more space because you know Max Verstappen is always going to go for that gap. That being said, it was a deserved penalty and it just wasn't a very strong performance. Obviously, he lost a number of places from that incident and had to fight his way back through. But he finished well adrift of the Mercedes and ended up sixth. So 5 out of 10.
I've gone with a 6 out of 10 for Max Verstappen. And call me controversial, but I'm going with the other side of the argument. I think that there comes a time and a place where you have to back out of a move. And I know how Max Verstappen is, and he doesn't like backing out of moves, but I don't think Oscar Piastri could have given him any more room. I think, especially when Max Verstappen was front wheel to rear wheel with Oscar Piastri, you knew something was going to happen here, and it unfolded like it did with both cars spinning out to the back of the grid. He did make a comeback to finish sixth, but it's another incident where Max Verstappen's involved, and he jokingly laughed about being on 8 penalty points and him timing his race suspension in quotation marks to the birth of his child. So does he want to take paternity leave in the middle of the 2025 season? He might do. But with that being said, the incident, I don't think it was avoidable. As soon as you saw Max Verstappen go for that gap, which Oscar Piastri, yes, he did leave, but sometimes Max just needs to realize that the move is not always there, and collisions, like he has seen multiple times this season, happen a lot more than he thinks. So yeah, a 6 out of 10. The penalty was well deserved, and the performance was for me very mediocre.
Pierre Gasly next, qualified in sixth and finished seventh, and I've gone for a 9 out of 10 for Gasly. It's so almost perfect. He's what a run to end the season he's had. Obviously the podium in Brazil, and he's had another couple of strong performances as well. Brilliant, 6 more points than where they were just 6 or 7 races ago. The fortune for that Alpine has flipped dramatically. And I think Gasly's going to go into the new season on a bit of a high now, with these last few performances under his belt. Secured sixth in the constructors. They've done it in a much different way to what they done last season, when they were about 50, 60 points clear of seventh place. But a brilliant performance nonetheless from Gasly. It's a 9 out of 10.
I'll agree with you on that one as well. I've also given Pierre Gasly a 9 out of 10. Like you mentioned, so almost perfect. Let's point out that a certain someone in an Aston Martin who had a very strong car at the start of the season wasn't able to get into the top 10, and pretty much a bread basket or a bread bin or whatever you want to call it made its way into the top 10 in the last 3 races because he outdrove the wheels of that Alpine and he made it inside the top 10 in the Drivers' Championship. Pierre Gasly, seriously, I applaud what he's done in the last 3 races because a podium and 2 strong performances in Qatar and in Saudi Arabia, where he's finished inside the points, have seen Alpine secure a lot more funding for next season. That's one. And has seen himself move into the top 10 in the Drivers' Championship, which I don't think any Alpine fans were expecting at the start of the season, and what happened in Bahrain where they were 19th and 20th. Think about it. What a difference a couple of months makes, eh? The good old saying still stands, and it definitely stands for Pierre Gasly because, like you mentioned, he's done himself no harm in putting these fantastic performances in for Alpine, gaining funding for his team, and vital resource money ahead of next season, which I'm sure they will need when they're looking to develop the 2026 car also, but looking to obviously make a strong start in 2025. But for Abu Dhabi, it's another fine performance for Pierre Gasly, 9 out of 10.
Nico Hulkenberg next, obviously qualified fourth, like we said. He started seventh and he finished eighth. And for the same reason for Gasly, I've also gone for a 9 out of 10. A brilliant way to end the season. It looked as if at one point Haas might be able to do it and clinch P6, but obviously what happened with Magnussen happened and they weren't able to do so. So it is a 9 out of 10 from Hulkenberg, though. Brilliant performance, like we said. And I think he must be thinking, what have I got myself into going to Sauber, with how bad that car is.
Hey, I've already told you. You talk about Sauber like that. He's basically having a free season. He's just going to be traveling around the world, thinking about it, just traveling around the world, driving a garbage truck, and just picking up a paycheck before Audi hit, and hopefully bring in the car that he needs. But yeah, for the same reasons that you've mentioned, I've gone for 9 out of 10 for Nico Hulkenberg. Pretty much Mr. Consistent throughout the whole season. He's had so many strong performances throughout the whole year. You can't count them on your fingers because it's sort of been a breath of fresh air for Nico Hulkenberg to return to the sport in the way he did. Obviously, had those couple of outings for Racing Point when Sebastian Vettel, I think it was, and Sergio Perez had COVID. But for the way he's performed this season, he's been arguably arguably the strongest performer outside the top three teams, top four teams, if you want to class Mercedes, because they were a bit far away from the top three. But from the top four teams, outside of them, Nico Hulkenberg has been the best performer this season. And like you mentioned, it's a sad sight to see him go to a garbage truck. But he's in it for the long run, I feel. He's in it for the Audi contract and what happens in 2026. But for Abu Dhabi, it's also similar to Pierre Gasly, 9 out of 10.
Fernando Alonso next, qualified in eighth and finished ninth. I've gone for an 8 out of 10. A strong end to the season for Alonso, a couple of good performances for what's been a largely disappointing campaign. But I thought he was very strong. He was smart in the way Aston Martin deployed Stroll is basically to keep Piastri behind. And that actually worked out a treat because it helped Alonso get ninth. Because I think Piastri was closing in very quickly. So good points for Alonso, good points for Aston Martin, and I think they need to have a long, hard look at themselves in the off season though, because they have not been good at all this season.
What you've mentioned the words that I've been mentioning for the last couple of weeks. They've not been good enough. Is that right? I've been talking about Aston Martin for the last year or so. I'm, I'm telling you, with their trajectory, they have a good start to the season, a bad end to the season, and then another good start to the season, another bad end to the season. And this time around, they'll have a fantastic start to the season in 2025, and then they'll fall away again. It's the yo-yo team. It's between Premier League and Championship when it comes to Aston Martin because they're like I think on the last podcast did I compare them to like a Norwich or a West Brom where they're just bouncing up and down between the leagues because one weekend they're somewhat there and it seems like all is not lost at Aston Martin and then another weekend it's just disappeared. But for Fernando Alonso, I've also gone with an 8 out of 10. He's obviously the teamwork in Aston Martin helped him maintain that ninth place in the end in Abu Dhabi. And yeah, it's like you mentioned, Aston Martin really do need to buckle their ideas up because if Alpine do make the stride forward and are able to somehow catch Aston Martin and kind of perform on a consistent basis next season, Aston Martin could be falling backwards very, very quickly. And with kind of Adrian Newey's ideas supposedly hitting in 2026, could it be struggle season for Aston Martin in 2025? We'll have to wait and see. But for this weekend, he had a very, very decent display, and was able to clinch some very much needed points for Aston Martin.
The final point scorer, Oscar Piastri, he qualified in second and finished 10th. I think this is a really difficult one to actually judge because you could argue it both ways here. I've gone for a 7 out of 10 because he had a good recovery drive after that initial incident. He obviously crashed into Colapinto shortly after he pit and basically ruined his race. But overall, thought it was a solid performance, good recovery to work his way back through the field. Maybe he could have got a couple more points, but who knows? But yeah, like 7 out of 10, I think it was solid.
I've actually gone one higher. I've actually given Oscar Piastri an 8. And I feel like we mentioned with his incident with Max Verstappen, I don't think he was at fault at all. But then again, he obviously had that incident with Franco Colapinto, and he was at fault. So you could look at it in two ways, but to qualify obviously on the front row is a positive, and to actually make it into the points after dropping all the way back to the back of the grid pretty much is another positive. So I've settled with an 8 out of 10 for Oscar Piastri. I think it still was a decent performance, but not exactly what he hoped for.
Up next, Alex Albon, the first of the drivers outside of the points. I thought it was a really, really strong race from Alex Albon. I thought he was very unlucky not to get any points to show for it. So I've gone for an 8 out of 10. I think Williams have had a bit of an up and down season. They haven't always looked very strong. And the last few races have been very disappointing. They haven't done well at all. A lot of crashes as well. But this was a very strong race from Albon and the Albon we're used to seeing. So I've gone for an 8 out of 10. I think it'll be intriguing to see how he stacks up against Sainz next season.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with you. I've also gone with an 8 out of 10 for Alex Albon. Obviously had to drop down to 18th after qualifying 16th because of his five-place grid penalty. But drove a very, very strong race, made it up to P11. Obviously couldn't hang on to the final points place. Oscar Piastri was inevitably going to get him. But yeah, a strong race, something that we've missed from Alex Albon's consistency this season. Because in 2023, he was very, very consistent throughout the whole season. And this season, like you mentioned, Williams have been very much similar to Aston Martin, a yo-yo team. They've had their good races, they've had their bad races. But I think the bad races, as of late, have outweighed the good races. So to have a good performance like this on a week on a season finale is also a positive, is always a positive. But essentially heading into a new season, and Alex Albon won't have a teammate like a Logan Sargent, like a Franco Colapinto, who are pretty much rookies. He's going to have an experienced veteran, should we say, with Carlos Sainz, because Carlos Sainz has been in the sport for a long time. But it will be interesting to see what that battle is all about. But for Abu Dhabi, Alex Albon, 8 out of 10.
Up next is Yuki Tsunoda. I've gone for a 6 out of 10 for Tsunoda. I thought it was solid, but nothing special. I think what's been intriguing is seeing him in what's actually been better than his race was seeing him in the Red Bull for doing the postseason testing, which maybe it's a sign of things to come. But based on the performance on Sunday, it was okay. But yeah, like I said, nothing great. It's a 6 out of 10 from me.
Oh, Yuki Tsunoda. Oh, Yuki in a Red Bull. It will be interesting to see if he gets that Red Bull seat because there's been a hell of a lot of speculation that Sergio Perez could be on his way out. Um, and with that being said, for this weekend, it was meh for Yuki Tsunoda. Nothing special, nothing great. Very much slap bang in the middle of the road, a 6 out of 10 performance. But what happens if that Red Bull situation is still up for debate because you've got Liam Lawson looking to try and get that seat. You've got obviously Yuki Tsunoda. What happens with the RB team then? It's all up in the air. But like you said, the most interesting part of the weekend was seeing Yuki Tsunoda in a Red Bull. His performance on the Sunday, I don't think wowed too many people, finishing in P12. Yeah, very, very average, very, very bog standard, I think.
Why don't you show up next? Qualifying 17th and finished 30th. 6 out of 10 for me. I think a lot of the positions he actually made up was because of cars retiring around him. Yeah, so I think obviously he had his moment in the limelight last week in Qatar when he got that fantastic points finish. So I think this was a bit of a wake up back to reality. So 6 out of 10.
Yeah, nothing much to add on from your points with Guan Yu Zhou. Had his moment with limelight last weekend, well, in Qatar. And this weekend it was very much bog standard, back to the drawing board for Zhou Guanyu in his final race in Formula One for the time being. I've also gone for 6.
Lance Stroll, 5 out of 10. Average, very average. Nothing more to say.
And I'm inclined to agree with you on that one. I've also gone with 5 out of 10. Bog standard average for Lance Stroll. The only good thing from the weekend for Lance Stroll, I think, was his kind of defensive teamwork, if you want to put it in very loose quotation marks, to help Fernando Alonso keep a hold of his 2 points. But that was about all you got for from Lance Stroll this weekend. It was meh, meh at best.
Jack Doohan obviously qualified last, like we touched on earlier, and then finished 15th. I've gone for a 6 out of 10. Like I said, I think he was approaching it as a testing session, basically. No pressure on him at all. And I think it'll be about preparing him, getting him that experience in an F1 car ready for the start of next season. So yeah, 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm also inclined to agree with a 6 out of 10. Um, treated it like a testing session. Started from the back. Well, well, he didn't really start from the back. He qualified at the back. He started from 17th, if you actually look on the flip of things, because we had a couple of grid penalties applied. So if you actually look at it, he didn't actually start from the back. Um, but with that being said, it was pretty much the back of the grid, and he pretty much finished at the back. So yeah, so it's just experience for him at the end of the day. Replacing Esteban Ocon for the final race of the season at Alpine. Yeah, 6 out of 10. I don't think you can really ask for more. It was just running and lap times and track data and him gaining a bit of knowledge about the car ahead of next season. So it's just good experience for Jack doing ahead of 2025.
And then the final of the actual on-track finishers, Kevin Magnussen qualified 15th, finished 16th. Gone for a 7 out of 10 because I think he was severely hampered and it wasn't his fault. I think he was running up in the points, he got a tremendous start. I think he was running up in eighth before the pit stops and then had a shocking pit stop, which was 7 or 8 seconds. And then obviously that incident involving Bottas, which was not his fault in the slightest. He got absolutely sent. And yeah, he couldn't do anything about that. So 7 out of 10, was a very solid race. And I think that if it wasn't for those two incidents, then he would have been finishing in the points.
Simple six for me, I think. Um, like you mentioned, got absolutely dive bombed. But who doesn't like a dive bomb? Everybody likes a good dive bomb. Apart from Kevin Magnussen was on the receiving end and fell away from the points, finishing plumb last of the actual on track finishes. So I've gone with 6 out of 10. I feel that yeah, it was if he was able to obviously not be involved in that incident, we could have been talking about a 7 or an 8 out of 10 from my perspective for Kevin Magnussen. Um, but with that being said, what happened happened, and he finished last, so six.
I don't even think you can call it dive bomb, you know. I think you can just call it an absolute shunt into him. He's actually sent Magnussen into the shadow realm. Moving on then to Liam Lawson, he qualified in 12th and technically did not finish. Technically was classified as 17th. I've gone for 6 out of 10 actually for Liam Lawson because I initially gave him a five, but then I did remember that he had a wheel that wasn't properly attached. And then he also got a 10-second stop and go penalty for that. So basically a 30-second penalty for something that wasn't his fault. It was just pit crew's fault. So I thought he was very unlucky there because he ended up losing probably about a minute, probably the best part of a minute across those two things. He was running well before that. I think he qualified just below Sonoda. So he was in that mix. He was on the fringes of the points in that battle there. But obviously with those two things, it's cost him the race. And whether we'll get the Red Bull seat next season, only time will tell. We'll have to wait and see on that one. But it was a solid performance for the season. It just didn't go his way.
Liam Lawson was taking a leaf out of Esteban Ocon's book, well and truly, on how to get penalties. But he didn't get the world record of penalties, which Esteban Ocon still holds to this day and probably will hold forever and ever. But I'm also inclined to agree with you on setting a 6 out of 10 for Liam Lawson. Very unfortunate for the penalties that he did get. And with that Red Bull seat in mind for Liam Lawson, I think that was always going to play on his mind when he did step in for Daniel Ricciardo at RB, whether he was able to kind of make that step up and prove to Helmut Marko and Christian Horner why he deserves the seat over Yuki Tsunoda. But I think with still with the races that Liam Lawson did participate in, Yuki Tsunoda looked head and shoulders uh, better than Liam Lawson. But then again, Yuki Tsunoda's had that sort of experience, has had that time in Formula One. So it's always going to happen. But in Abu Dhabi, it was yeah, it was average. It was average at best. Qualified relatively well, but from that point onwards, it was a little bit of a mixed bag in the race.
Valtteri Bottas next qualified in ninth and did not finish. I've gone for a 4 out of 10. Obviously, he's absolutely done Magnussen in, and he's got a three-place grid penalty to take in his next Formula One race, whenever that is. I don't know what happens if he doesn't do another F1 race where they sort of give him a fine or something. But if he does return to the sport somehow, he'll get a three-place grid penalty in his next race. I kind of think that first incident on lap one involving Perez is a little bit unlucky because there's so much going on into that corner. He's not been given much space by Perez at all. But yeah, it's one of those lap one incidents, I think. So I think it was a bit harsh to give him a penalty there. So a 4 out of 10 overall.
But you've not taken into perspective his qualifying at all with that 4 out of 10.
That's why it's a 4 and not like a 2, because he's cost himself his own race by absolutely killing Magnussen, basically. So it's actually elevated with that P9 in qualifying.
Oh, YOLO, you only live once, right? Stop being such a party pooper. Come on. I've inclined to give Valtteri Bottas a grade high. I've gone with a 5. Um, we've mentioned the sort of accidents that he's had, and we've talked about the three-place grid penalty that he's got to take in his next Formula One race. But I think Sauber in the last two races of the season have they shown us what they could be all about in 2025, where they're actually making it into Q3 and actually getting into the points and not finishing as a who's the last team that's actually finished on 0 points in the Formula One Championship?
Got to be
I'm trying to
Haas in
think.
2021.
What did they finish pointless?
Yeah, when they had Schumacher and Mazepin.
Okay.
Got to be them.
But we've obviously not seen the teams that we have seen in Formula One in the last couple of seasons are obviously a mainstay in Formula One. But we have obviously had teams in the past like your Marussias, your Manners, your who else have we had that's a rogue team? I'm trying to think of rogue teams that have entered the sport, but you get the gist. You know what I mean? We hardly ever see a team go pointless in Formula One. But when it comes to Sauber, everybody was pretty much betting on them going pointless. And they didn't in the end. Joe saved them. But for Valtteri Bottas, from the highs of qualifying in P9 to the lows of getting yourself a free place grid penalty when you're not even on the grid in 2025. What's next? What's next? I think I need to get a t-shirt. What's next for Valtteri Bottas? What is happening? Because in Abu Dhabi, he didn't do himself any favors, especially in the race. So yeah, 6 out of 10. It's not 6, 5, 5, 5. Sorry.
He does win the P22 championship, though, which was fierce competition with Logan Sargent, because Jack Doohan finished down in 17th, or down in 15th, sorry. So he doesn't overtake either of them. So Jack Doohan finishes 24th this season. Last two drivers now, Franco Colapinto, I've gone for a 5 out of 10. I can't really judge him too harshly because I think he retired from with an engine failure after having to make an extra pit stop because of that early crash with Piastri. Completely not his fault, but it's cost him. So 5 out of 10.
Not much to add. I'm also inclined to agree to a 5 out of 10.
And then finally, Sergio Perez, I've gone for a 5 out of 10 as well. The only thing saving him is the fact I don't think it was necessarily his fault. Obviously, he could have been a bit more cautious into the corner there, where he got tagged by Bottas and had to retire. Qualifying 10th as well. He got a poor start. He dropped to about 15th when he made that contact. So it wasn't a great start from him. And then he's kind of not helped himself by being dropped into the pack there. So 5 out of 10.
Once again, I couldn't agree more. I could easily give him a 2 out of 10 or something, but yeah, I can't judge him too harshly on a lap one incident. So I've also gone with a 5 out of 10.
And then just reviewing our Abu Dhabi Grand Prix predictions. So I got a big fat 0 out of 2 star predictions correct. I had 0 DNFs and I had Haas to finish P6 in the constructors. Obviously, they both did not come through.
And I also hit a massive 0 out of 2. I had K-Mag points, which were on the cards until what happened to him. And I also had a Lewis Hamilton podium, and he finished in P4. So very somber note with those two.
I got a big 2 out of 10 on my predictions. So I had a Norris pole and a Norris win. Apart from that, I had nothing. So I had Verstappen second in qualifying, then Russell third, Leclerc fourth, Piastri fifth. And then in the race, I had Leclerc second, and Verstappen, Piastri, and Sainz, the rest of the top five.
Okay, I'm is you're the host for this episode. I want your official kind of verdict on this. Are we counting Max Verstappen as a P4 qualifier or as a P5 qualifier?
Qualified
Because
fifth. No, he qualified fifth,
he
didn't he?
qualified fifth but got bumped up to fourth because of Nico Hulkenberg's penalty. So what are we classing it as?
Oh, no, I'm going to be mean. So I think I've had it that way around when I haven't got it.
Okay, that's fine. So I've got an only a 1 out of 10 for a Norris victory. So in qualifying, I went Leclerc, Hamilton, Norris, Verstappen, and Sainz. And in matter of fact, it was Norris, Piastri, Sainz, Nico Hulkenberg, and Max Verstappen in fifth. And then in the race, I predicted Norris correctly. Predicted Leclerc second, Hamilton third, Sainz fourth, and Verstappen fifth. But it was Sainz, Leclerc, Hamilton, and George Russell that rounded off the top five. So I've had a dismal couple of rounds, but yeah, it's not been great for me in predictions. Hopefully 2025 come to fruition with predictions. But do you want to talk about Formula 2 a little bit? Do you want to have a
Well,
Formula 2 chat?
you have just set me up nicely. So obviously, Gabriel Bortoleto had won the F2 title this weekend in Abu Dhabi.
What did I
Uh,
predict? What did I say? You two, when it came to last episode, you and Terry were very much on Isaac Hadjar's side. I knew. Thank you.
well, I will just say I think that Isaac Hadjar was very, very hard done by. He obviously had that issue at the start of the feature race where he went into anti-stall and basically lost a lap to the leaders. And from that point moving forward, he had no chance. He had absolutely no chance. I think he finished a race just for the engineers, but for that to happen on lap one, when he was in a good position as well, I think he was only a couple of places behind Bortoleto, needed to make up about what was it, 4.5 points after the sprint race. Um, so I think he was hard done by there. I think he feel a bit frustrated about that. But I think Bortoleto was brilliant. He done it, made it count when it mattered. I think he went from eighth in the sprint to second. Is that right? Including overtaking Hadjar. And do you know what? They both might be on the grid next season. Obviously, Bortoleto confirmed it's Sauber, but Hadjar might be getting that RB seat if either Sonoda or Lawson gets a Red Bull seat. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. But that's all we've got time for on this episode of On the Grid Podcast. Thank you all for listening. And I'm sure during the off season there'll be a couple more episodes for you. I'm sure we'll look at our 1 to 10 driver ratings, look at our pre-season championship predictions and all of that. So thank you all for listening. And until the next one, goodbye.